Oh, John Libby, professor.
Very likely, UC College. Brian Director.
Rob Bertini, faculty member.
Tony Pennington, environmental science.
I'm Jeff Mapes. I'm a journalist.
Chris Woods here, faculty member.
Datwin, City of Portland.
And
Ben Furman, post-bac student.
okay. So now I'm going to wave to, there we go. Magic. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Dill. I'm director of the Center for Transportation Studies and a faculty member here. And along with my colleagues, Rob Bertini, Chris Montseer, and John Levy, who's back there, we help co-organize this weekly seminar. And this week in particular is being co-sponsored, the seminar is being co-sponsored, and our speaker is being co-sponsored by OTREC, the Oregon Transportation Research and Education Consortium, directed by Rob Bertini. So we're very happy to have the resources of OTREC to bring Susan Handy here today to speak with us. Before I introduce her, I'm going to remind everyone, and particularly for people who are new to the seminar, that we do webcast the seminar, so people are watching live on the web. And because of that, if you do ask a question, please use the microphone that is in front of most of the desks. Keep the red light lit while you're asking the question so that people watching on the web can hear. And we do have people watch on the web, so we're not making you do this just to make you do it. So, anyway, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Susan Handy. She's a professor in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy at UC Davis, and she's the director of the Sustainable Transportation Center at UC Davis, which is a new university transportation center there. Her research focuses on transportation and travel behavior and interactions between transportation and land use. And she is going to be presenting some very recent research that she's been doing, specifically focused on bicycling in Davis, California. And do you want people to hold questions to the end?
I think we can do some questions along the way, at least short ones. Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to CTS and OTREC for bringing me here. I'm delighted to see this amazing turnout. I think this is just one more indicator I've seen of kind of this growing energy and enthusiasm around the issue of biking. And I don't know about all of you, but I sort of feel like there's this convergence of forces that mean that biking really makes sense at this point in time. And that maybe there's this opportunity out there that if we grab it, can make biking once again an important form of transportation in this country. Now, you know, how we take advantage of that opportunity, I think, is to look at communities out there where biking works. And I'm fortunate enough to live in one of those communities, Davis, California, where biking does work. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, is some of the experiences with respect to biking in Davis. And you may know that Davis was, there we go, not long ago named the first platinum level bicycle-friendly community in the U.S. by the League of American Bicyclists. So Davis for a long time has been known as a bicycling community. We like to think of ourselves as the bicycle capital of the U.S. And, you know, it has a lot to do with the planning that's gone on over the years in Davis. We have this fabulous system of bikeways and bike paths that link the entire city. Are you all familiar with Davis? Maybe I should ask that question first. Okay, Davis is a college town of about 60,000 people outside of Sacramento, California, in the Central Valley. So you go down I-5 about 10 hours, and you just about get to Davis. So it's, you know, it's not a big place, but I'll tell you a little more about the history of biking there in a minute. Now, you know, do we deserve this label as the bicycle capital of the U.S.? Well, one source of data we can look to compare biking levels in different communities is the U.S. Census. And they don't ask a lot about transportation, but they do ask, how did you usually get to work last week? Biking being one of the options. And so I looked at that data and tried to come up with every sort of bicycling-oriented college town I could think of to compare Davis to. And Davis came out far ahead of every other place, except for one little blip, which is Isla Vista. Anybody know Isla Vista? It's this little student housing ghetto that isn't even an incorporated city on the edge of UC Santa Barbara. So they have more biking than Davis, but Davis beats everybody else, whether you're talking about Boulder, Eugene, any other biking college town you can think of. But the question then is, how did this come to be? Why is there so much more biking going on in Davis than in these other places? How did Davis come to be a bicycle city? What is it about Davis that gets people on their bikes? And then, sort of thinking about what it is we're doing there, is Platinum good enough? We've got more biking than other places, but is it really as much biking as there could and there should be? Now, when I got to Davis about 5 years ago, as a transportation planner and a travel behavior researcher, these were the kinds of questions I was interested in, and I was so surprised to find that despite Davis's bicycle reputation, there actually had been very little research done to try and understand these questions, and very little data about levels of biking within Davis. So, of course, I see this as an opportunity, a good research opportunity, and so set out to do a series of studies that would explore these questions. And what I'm going to present today is the very sort of first of the results from these studies, and I hope actually that there will be a whole bunch more studies to follow. But they're designed to answer those questions. And what I'm going to look at today is three things we've worked on so far. One is a study of the evolution of bicycling policy in Davis. What happened historically that made us become the bicycle capital of the U.S. A second study where we're trying to understand the behavior, what factors influence biking in Davis, and then a little study we did this past fall that looked at this Bike to Soccer program that the Youth Soccer League put on in the fall. Now, the first of these studies is the farthest along and actually has been presented in Davis. These other two, hot off the presses, data analysis that nobody in Davis has yet seen. So you're going to be the first to see these. But my caveat is that this is a little raw still, and we're kind of still not only doing the analysis, but thinking through what it is that it's telling us. So the story is very, very much new and may be evolving. Now, what's going on here? Okay. Close. Okay, so the first study, evolution of bicycle policy in Davis. How did Davis get to be the bicycle capital of the U.S.? This was a study that was funded by the University of California Transportation Center, whose funding comes from the U.S. Department of Transportation and Caltrans, our California Department of Transportation. I want to give full credit for this work to my student, Ted Bueller, who's a master's student in our Transportation Technology and Policy program at UC Davis. He's been doing this work as a part of his thesis, which should get turned in any day now. Ted, if you're out there watching. Anyway, so this is wonderful work that he's been doing. And in fact, he presented this a couple of months ago in Davis at our downtown the old movie theater where they do community events as well, to a packed house of at least 300 Davis residents. So they've seen this, and what I'm going to give you is just a quick synopsis kind of what he found in his explorations. Now, there were lots of stories about how Davis got to be a bicycle community. Lots of kind of community stories and anecdotes. So what we set out to do was document that. Nobody had really sat down and kind of put it to paper. And what Ted did was go out and dig up every document he could find related to sort of this history of biking in Davis, and interviewed dozens of people involved with this over the years. And it's a good thing he did, because in fact a lot of the people involved are getting to the point where they're not going to be with us much longer. So it was really sort of critical that we do this history sooner than later. And in his digging, he largely confirmed kind of the anecdotes that were out there, but I think added a lot of richness to the story. So that's what I'm going to share with you, is some of those findings. Now, the history of biking in Davis goes back at least 50 years, and it has as much to do with the University of California at Davis as it does with the city. And in fact, really, I think that it was the university, as it turns out, that launched this bicycle community as much as it was the city. Before Davis was famous as a bicycle community, there was a lot of biking going on there. In the 1950s, it was a very small place. There were only about 5,000 residents compared to 60,000 now, and about 2,000 students on campus compared to, we're getting somewhere between 25,000 and 30,000 students now. And people biked. And if you talk to people who were there back then, they said everyone rode a bike. The story is that there were more bikes than cars, more bikes than people, and more bikes than cars in the city at that point in time. But it was also clear that Davis was really at a turning point in the 1950s. University of California decided that UC Davis, which had been this little agricultural outpost for the UC system, was going to become a full-fledged university. So in the 50s, Davis was facing this tremendous population growth. Now, one of the key players was Chancellor Mrack. He was a UC Davis professor who was hired to be the chancellor for the university as it underwent this transformation from a agricultural outpost to a full-fledged university. And this was really interesting because the story had always been that that Chancellor Mrack had pushed the biking, this biking idea, and had told students that when they came to campus they needed to bring a bike with them. But one thing Ted dug up was this oral history that Mrack gave later in his life at age 73. And he talked about how he had loved biking as a kid. God, I loved bicycles. So, the power of an individual with this commitment and this love for biking and the influence that he then had on policy on campus. So his term, he was chancellor for this period of time when the university grew tremendously from a few thousand students to many thousand of students. And so he had this opportunity to impose his vision on the campus as it physically grew. So, here's a statement about his his policy, pedestrians and bicycles. I have asked our architects to plan for a bicycle riding tree-lined campus. And Ted likes to point this out, tree-lined campus, and then you look at his official portrait, which was actually taken by Ansel Adams, trees. And then a bicycle riding campus, bicycles in his official portrait. So it is clear that he had a big impact on what happened. And if you look at the 1963 long-range development plan for the campus, there was a significant emphasis on bicycle and pedestrian movement within the campus. So the plan talks about separated bike paths all across campus, putting in safe crossings at the boundary streets with underpasses, a couple of which were actually eventually built, closing central campus to cars, which happened, so that the streets that were there are bicycle streets at this point in time. And then the one thing that they talked about that didn't happen was closing 3rd Street, which is the street that links the campus into downtown, close that to cars and make that a bicycle street. And I point that out because that's one that keeps coming back over the years. People always talk about, well, why don't we just close 3rd Street to cars? But it still has not happened. Now, what's interesting is that while this was going on campus, and while Mrack was promoting bicycles on campus, the city was not terribly supportive of this. So one example is that in 1963 there was this crackdown on the scofflaw bicyclists, and the police were trying to enforce better bicycling behavior. And, some of the punishments that were possible are really funny. So attend traffic school, be deprived of a bicycle for a period not to exceed 30 days. This is very encouraging of bicycling, right? Or, copying 100 times the section of the bicycle ordinance violated. Okay, so this was, just one indicator of sort of the city attitude toward biking at this point in time. Now, 1964 is kind of when things started to change. And So 1964, we're at this crossroads. So everyone biked, campus and town. There was a lot of biking going on. Geographically, Davis is a great place for biking because it's got good weather, although it gets a little hot in the summer, and it's perfectly flat. A lot of support for biking on campus, but the city isn't so supportive. And there was this infamous crackdown by the police. So what's going to happen? Which way do we go? Well, that's when the citizens get involved. And what happened was there was a UC Davis professor who spent some time in Amsterdam with his family. I think he was there on sabbatical for some period of time. And he came back to Davis and said, why can't we be like Amsterdam? This is a perfect place to do that. So he wrote a letter to the editor, and that kicked off this citizens advocacy group effort, the Citizens Bicycle Study Group, that tried to push the city to do more for biking. And in fact, they put together a petition that was given to city council. But still, city council at this point is very resistant, and they just, they weren't interested in doing anything. So over a period of a couple of years, the citizens worked hard to bring the city around, and it in fact took a couple of years. So they worked to raise public consciousness about biking. And then by 1966, city council election, that became the big issue, cycling. And in fact, what the voters did was vote out the old city council and vote in people who were supportive of biking. So 1966 is when the city comes around and begins to support biking as well. So 1966, city council voted to direct public works to build bike lanes. And that's where things take off. And Ted likes to point out this change in the sort of the priority apparently given to bicycling in the local paper, the Davis Enterprise, where, in 1964, biking is lower than co-ed week, and you get to 1966, and biking gets greater play than the astronauts, indicative of the change in thinking. Okay, so 67 to 72 is the golden age of biking in Davis. City council came in supportive of biking. They established a mandate. They pushed city staff to address this. City staff worked together with the citizen advocates to figure out what to do, because in the 1960s there weren't a lot of sort of practices about bicycling planning. We didn't have design standards for bike lanes and bike paths and all of that. None of that had yet been invented. So the city went through this sort of open design process where they thought about, well, what kind of facilities do we need for bikes? How should we design these? And they did a lot of experimentation, some of which worked and some of which didn't, but they were essentially inventing a bicycle system from scratch at that point in time. And some of it involved, dealing with the California Vehicle Code, for example, which had, didn't really allow for these things to happen. So not only did they have to invent these, but they had to get the changes in the code that would allow them to do these things. So first bike lanes opened in 1967, and what everybody says is that by 1972, everything had already happened. I'll come back to that point. But this 5-year period, there was a tremendous just sort of flourishing of bicycle planning going on in the community. Now on the right, you can see sort of two ways that the public works people were thinking about dealing with the bicycle streets on campus. What do you do when you've got two bicycle routes coming together? Do you put a signal in or a stop sign? So there were some of their attempts, and not surprisingly, they went with the one on the top right rather than the one on the bottom. So we've got these bicycle roundabouts on campus that we seem to be famous for. So 1967 to 1972, all kinds of things going on, and here's just a list of the kinds of things where Davis was really a national leader with respect to bicycle planning. From the bicycle routes to bicycle parking, to changes in the subdivision code, to accessible bike shops and educational programs. So it was a very comprehensive effort at that time. And what happened is that we preserved that kind of initial bicycle culture that was a part of Davis, but expanded it as well. Why did all this come about? Well, this is Ted's analysis. That it really had to do with this strong coalition of bicycle advocates that included the public, but also the staff, who were very supportive of all this, and the elected officials. So those three groups coming together, all around this this interest in promoting biking. The public works staff was very instrumental in all of this, in their efforts to find engineering solutions, to build a supportive infrastructure for bicycling. The fact that the city was willing to try things, and there were some successes and there were some failures, but they weren't afraid to try some new things when we didn't know what was going to be best. All of this, goes along with the environmental movement at the time, was very conducive to this effort as well. There was a lot of public enthusiasm. And all these things together meant that there was this great window of opportunity to make things happen that lasted for at least this period of time. Question?
I was just wondering what the relationship with all this was with the bike boom that was going on nationally at the time. Do you think that this was sort of a seed of that, or did this sort of ride that wave?
Ted can answer that question better than I can, but I think this was, I wouldn't say it's entirely independent, but I think this would have been going on even if that hadn't been going on. But that probably helped, yeah. This is a great picture of the high school parking lot at the time. What do you notice? It's not full of cars the way actually it is today, and most high school parking lots are today. Now, if 67 to 72 is when everything happened, then 72 and on is after everything happened. And this is kind of this is the critical part of the story, is what did we do after all these wonderful successes? So by 72, there's sort of a Davis model for how you create a bicycle community, and it really covered the 4 E's that we talk about in bicycle planning: education, engineering, enforcement, encouragement. All of that was going on. But at the same time, things were going on other places. Davis wasn't the only place trying to promote bicycling. And in fact, other places innovated in ways that Davis didn't. One I'll just point out that will come up again later when we look at the data is the yard waste containers. Some communities implemented a system where you put the yard waste in the containers. In Davis, we still put it out on the street, and then it gets picked up. So it often is sitting in the bike lane, for a couple of days before it gets picked up. And then, things that we had been doing sort of fell by the wayside over time. So that by 2000, we don't necessarily have enough bike racks everywhere to support all the bikes. The education programs disappeared somewhere along the way, and the police outreach efforts disappeared somewhere along the way. So, after a lot of success, we got a little complacent, and, suddenly we're not doing everything that we were or that we possibly could be. Again, like I said, there's not a lot of data out there on biking in Davis, but what data there are do support the belief among everybody in the community that biking has dropped off over time. So again, you can look at census data and compare 1990 to 2000, and you see a drop in the share of workers in Davis who usually commute to work by bike. At the same time that those levels stayed, or that measure stayed level in lots of other cities.
Were there changes in the pattern of distance people are traveling?
Yeah, I'll come back to the cause in just a moment.
When you talk about the next, when you talk about the next slide, can you also mention when transit service will start?
Yes, that comes up too. And then the other data we have is from campus. And again, this has not been systematic, but every time they do a planning effort, they go out and try and measure what students are doing, and there's been a fall off in students biking to campus. Now, the question is why the decline? So if you ask the people around town who've been involved in this, they point to certain things going on. So these are the popular scapegoats, as Ted says, that young people no longer bike. So kids are biking less, which means they bike less as students and they bike less as grown-ups. That we've had an influx of Sacramento commuters, and that actually is true. You can look at the census data and see that more of the people living in Davis are now working outside of Davis and commuting to Sacramento or even commuting to the Bay Area. An outflux of university employees, and again, we do know this, that fewer UC Davis employees are living in Davis, and that's partly because of housing costs within Davis. So more of them are commuting from elsewhere. There's the free transit effect. Some years ago, the campus started up a transit system that the students pay for through their fees, so it looks like free transit to them. And I am amazed when I bike to campus how many students I bike past who are standing at the bus stop waiting to get on the bus, when if they were just on their bikes, they'd already, be at campus. So it is clear that there's a shift from biking to transit among the students, and that explains some of the decline in their biking. So it's not that they're driving more necessarily, but they're biking less. The town has gotten bigger. It has grown, so the distances are longer, and that could be discouraging driving. And then the sense that there was saturation, that everybody who was already biking, everybody who was going to bike was already biking. So, we sort of had as much biking as we were going to have. So that was, that's what people say. But it turns out that there hasn't been any sort of research to document this. So whether these are valid scapegoats or not, there's some question, at least in some cases. There was no effort to say, okay, here are the problems. Is there anything we can do about this, about these changes going on? And there was also very little attention to what Ted calls internal factors, things that the city was doing or not doing that could have been contributing as well. So a lot of talk about these external scapegoats, things we think we can't do anything about, but not much internal reflection about what could we be doing differently. Internal factors that have been kind of ignored. Public works experts, those individuals who've been so instrumental in bringing about a lot of this, they were reaching retirement age. And in fact, they retired, and we've had this turnover in public works staff. And the current public works staff, doesn't have the same sort of commitment to biking, apparently. Building parking garages, so we've been putting a lot of money into car infrastructure at the same time that the bicycling programs have been rather cash-starved, including things like bicycle parking, where there's not been an investment in new forms of bicycle parking and making sure there's enough bicycle parking. Education programs went away, as I said. The bicycle advocacy groups sort of dispersed once once it seemed like they'd achieved what they were setting out to achieve. Other things going on as well. The city sort of not really dealing with the fact that traffic levels were increasing, and they weren't kind of continuing their earlier policies about what kind of facilities do you need given traffic conditions, given the kinds of distances people need to travel. No attention to the bicycle theft problem, which is pretty significant. No looking towards what other communities were doing and thinking about adopting those technologies elsewhere. And essentially no proactive kind of approach to addressing the changes going on in Davis. Very much in contrast to what had gone on from 67 to 72. Just one example, traffic levels as Davis has grown have gone up considerably. So this very innovative facility that was put in 1972, the first of the kind of this, special left turn lane for bicyclists, worked great then, but as traffic levels increase today, it's just no longer enough to provide for safe bicycling. So why did we succeed? What brought about these wonderful changes in Davis? Well, Davis was well suited from the start to become a bicycle capital of the U.S. But what really made it happen, according to Ted's analysis, is the leaders that we had in the community and their vision. Chancellor Merak and the citizens in particular, followed by the Public Works Department, is really what made this happen. And then Ted likes to say that even though conditions were perfect in Davis, there are a lot of other places where conditions were perfect too. And they just didn't have the leaders. So if our leaders had happened to go somewhere else like Chico, then, who knows what Davis would have been, but we probably would not have been the bicycle capital of the U.S., and maybe we would have been the square tomato capital of America. Sacramento is the tomato capital. I don't know if you know that. Now, the question is, what about the future? Where do we go from here? And our sense is that Davis is at something of a crossroads. Things have changed. Biking's going down. Do we let it continue, or is there something that we can do about it? Well, we've got this amazing infrastructure that we can work with. And, maybe it doesn't take a whole lot to fix some of the problems. A few little changes to the infrastructure could make a big difference. But what we really need is what we had before, where you have you have the advocacy coming from citizens and public works and the elected officials, where there's a willingness to experiment, and you've got the political support to deal with the changes going on in Davis. So it's kind of at this point where we can decide which way we go. And there seems to be this growing movement within Davis to make it happen, to make sure that we don't fall off the map as the platinum community. Okay, that was story one. I've got 2 more to go, and hopefully enough time to do this. And then maybe I'll take questions at the end. Now, the second thing we've set out to do is try and understand what explains why there is so much biking in Davis. And this is a study actually tied to the first one that was also funded by the University of California Transportation Center. Ted worked on this as well, and I've got another student working on this now, Yan Jing, and she's done most of the data analysis here. What we're trying to do is explain bicycling behavior in Davis, and you can measure this in different ways. How frequently people bike, how far they're going, what purposes they're biking for. And we've got sort of 3 categories of things we think help explain this. So one category is individual factors about the individual themselves. So people's preference for biking, their level of comfort with biking. There's also the social environment. It's clear that Davis has a bicycling culture, and that may have some influence on how frequently and people bike and who's biking and all of that. And then the third category is physical environment factors, the kind of stuff that planners have some control over. So looking at bicycle infrastructure, but also land use mix within the community, the structure of the community. So for our study, what we're trying to do is sort out sort of the relative importance of these different factors in explaining bicycling behavior in Davis. And what makes this complicated is that these things are all kind of intertwined with each other. They are not independent. So if you have a strong bicycling culture, as we've had in Davis, that tends to lead to better bicycling infrastructure. So that's a challenge in the analysis, and the stuff I'm showing you does not yet sort out these interrelationships, but that's what we're ultimately trying to do. So for this study, what we did was focus on Davis and then 5 comparison cities, and I'll show you what those are in a minute. And we're doing both cross-sectional comparison, meaning comparing what's going on in each community at one point in time, and then we're also playing around with what we call quasi-longitudinal analysis, where we look at people who've moved to Davis recently. How does Davis compare to their prior community, and how does their biking now compare to their prior community? We did an online survey because we had a limited budget, and ended up with not great response rate, which is problematic, as I'll show you in a minute, but 864 responses across these 5 cities. Now, in picking the comparison cities, this is what we set out to do. We wanted to find cities that were similar in lots of ways to Davis, including topography, weather, size, kind of its standalone status as opposed to being embedded within a metropolitan area, college town, sociodemographics. We wanted to control for all of those things. And then what we were hoping to do is find places that were similar with respect to those characteristics, but different with respect to bicycle infrastructure and bicycle culture. Those are the 2 kind of key variables we wanted to vary to see what effect they had. Now, finding cities that perfectly fit those goals was not possible, but this is what we came up with. So Davis, which has good bicycle infrastructure and strong bicycle culture. And then we have 3 cities from the Central Valley of California, and I'll show you a map in a minute, that vary with respect to infrastructure and culture. So Chico, low infrastructure, high culture; Woodland, high infrastructure, low culture; and then Turlock, low infrastructure, low culture. And then we also decided it would be interesting to compare Davis to other college biking towns where there's high infrastructure and high culture, to sort of get a sense of, are there kind of different kinds of biking towns? And that's most of what I'm going to focus on, is this comparison with Boulder and Eugene, because that may be of most interest to you, and maybe ultimately of most interest altogether. These are where the towns are. So Davis and Woodland, about 10 miles apart outside of Sacramento. Chico, where Chico State is located, is quite a bit farther north, and then Turlock to the south. Before we got into this, we did some looking at available information about bicycling infrastructure in each of these communities, based on planning documents and the like. And this is what we came up with in terms of miles of bike lanes or bike paths per square mile. So, it's not perfect, and in fact, it looks like Boulder has more than Davis. Woodland actually does pretty well. And we put Eugene into the high bicycle infrastructure category, but in fact, based on the data we could find, it may be sort of lighter on infrastructure than Davis and Boulder. Okay, so biking behavior. Let's look at how much people are biking in these different places. So first, just comparing Davis to the other Central Valley towns. Well, not surprisingly, there's a whole lot more biking going on in Davis than in Chico, Woodland, or Turlock. This first one is percent usually biking to work. Now, I showed you a little bit ago that graphic on percent usually biking to work from the census data. And what that showed was that in 2000, there was 14.4% of Davis workers usually biking to work, whereas our survey shows over 30%. Okay, so it's not likely that biking to work has actually doubled in that period of time. So we know that our sample is biased towards people who bike. So when you look at these numbers, keep that in mind, okay, that these are not good measures of how much biking is actually going on. But the bias, we see that across all of the communities we looked at. So the comparison is still, we hope, valid and interesting. But just remember that the absolute levels are probably exaggerated here. Okay, so
the numbers from the other towns, are those census numbers, or are those also?
This is from our survey. Yeah, so I'm not showing you the comparison with the census, but it's comparable. So our numbers are always higher than the census, except in Turlock, where the census actually shows there's 1% of people biking to work, something like that, and we didn't get anybody. And then Jennifer and I looked up the census number for the U.S. as a whole just before we came in, and it's 0.4% of people in the U.S. usually bike to work. So we're talking about a whole lot more in Davis than what you would find for the U.S. as a whole.
I'm sorry, but just why did you exclude Boulder, although it has...
I'm going to come back to Boulder. Okay, so I'm just going to show you these quickly now, and then I'm going to focus on Boulder and Eugene. Okay. This is, let's see. Percent usually biking to work. That's the same thing. Wait a minute. Okay, I didn't change the titles. This is percent of people biking in the last 7 days, despite what it says up there. So again, Davis higher than all these others. And this is percent biking in the last year. So Turlock comes up a little bit. They have people who occasionally bike, but they're not biking so much on a regular basis.
What month was that survey?
It was July to September.
Pretty hot.
Yes, and that was just partly because that's how the timing worked. But we would expect things to go up a little bit more in the fall, for example. Winter is not a great biking time for these towns necessarily. Okay, now the question is, what about Davis versus the other bicycle towns, Boulder and Eugene? So this is how it comes out. Davis looks higher. In fact, statistically, this is not a significant difference. Oh, wait, no. On biking to work, it is a statistically significant difference, but not a huge difference. And then, again, I forgot to change the titles. You've got, like I said, this is very fresh and last minute. This is percent biking in the last 7 days. So you can see it's much closer. These are not statistically significant differences. And then this is biking in the last year. Again, not statistically significantly different. So there's the same amount of biking essentially going on in these three towns. Now, question is, what explains differences between Davis and those Central Valley towns? And then, there aren't differences in how much biking is going on in Davis versus Eugene and Boulder, but maybe there are differences in what explains why there is that amount of biking going on. So that's what we set out to explore, was individual factors, social factors, physical factors explaining how much biking was going on. Physical factors, we asked about perceptions of infrastructure. Does your community have these things? And not surprisingly, Davis came out higher than all the Central Valley towns on all that stuff. So I'm not going to show you any more about the Central Valley towns because it's pretty clear that Davis has got better infrastructure and it's got better culture, and and it's got different kind of people, and that's explaining why there's so much more biking there. But what's interesting to look at is the comparison to the other biking towns. So on most of those infrastructure things, there was not a significant difference. On bike lanes, a small significant difference. So Boulder has a few less bike lanes. Davis, a little less free of obstacles, and we think that goes back to that garden debris in the bike lane issue. Physical factors. We also looked at distance from home to various destinations. And here, again, not a lot of big differences. Although in Davis, people seem to be a little closer to stuff, which would make it a little more bikeable. So Davis is closer to grocery stores and elementary schools. Boulder's a little closer to bike shops, which is maybe related to something else I'll show you in a minute. Social factors. We asked about perceptions about drivers, driver behavior. And this was interesting because there were not differences between these three cities on this. And while everybody sort of felt like drivers are aware of bicyclists and they'll yield to them and all of that, they also think they all speed. So, drivers are good in some respects and not so good in others. Then we also asked about perceptions of other bicyclists, and this is to try and get at that bicycling culture aspect of the community. And here again, on most of these, there were not significant differences, but the really interesting one is this one, where this is percent agreeing that bikers look like they spend a lot of money on their bikes, and Boulder, just really sticks out. So this is the first clue that Boulder is a different kind of biking community than Davis is. And I think it sort of picks up here a little bit too, where we asked about their kids bike around the neighborhood a lot for fun, and Boulder is lower here. So again, a clue that biking is different in Boulder than in Davis. Then we asked about individual factors, a whole set of things having to do with safety. And this is interesting because each of these three cities ends up having a different kind of issue. So percent concerned about being hit by a car is higher in Boulder than in Davis or Eugene. And actually kind of the converse is maybe more interesting, that in Davis people are a whole lot less likely to be concerned about being hit by a car. Percent concerned about being mugged. Eugene, it is only 10%, but it is a whole lot higher than the others. I don't know why. And then this is percent who report that they've been injured while riding a bike in that city. And Davis was much higher than the others. They weren't worried about being hit by a car, so maybe it's injuries from other things like running into other bicyclists, which can be a real problem, or running into that debris that's sitting in the bike lane. So we need to explore this a little more. Okay, and then preferences and attitudes. No different. Everybody in these communities is sort of environmentally oriented. They like biking and all of that. The one thing that stood out was that the Eugene people like driving a little bit more than Davis and Boulder residents, but otherwise no different. But then another thing we wanted to get at was kind of this issue of self-selection. Is there something about the kind of people who are choosing to live in these communities? So this is percent saying that that the community being a good community for bicycling was important in that decision about where to live. And here Davis comes out much higher than Boulder and Eugene. And this goes back to kind of Ted's point in the history that having the right people in Davis made a big difference. So it does seem that people who like the idea of being able to bike as a mode of transportation are, to some degree, consciously choosing to live in Davis. Okay, and then kind of another part of the story is that we also asked about the purpose of the last bike ride that you made. And here again, a significant difference for Davis, where the majority of people in Davis said that the last bike ride had been for transportation, whereas in Boulder and Eugene, it was for recreation rather than transportation. So again, it suggests that Davis is a different kind of bicycle community. So preliminary conclusions from all of this, and a big question mark here, because this is very preliminary. Like I said, we've just been running these numbers, and we're not quite sure this is going to hold up when we start running our more sophisticated statistical analyses. But this is what it's starting to look like. That you need both infrastructure and culture. That if you don't have both of those, you're not going to have a lot of biking going on. Question mark. differences in biking between biking towns has more to do with social and individual factors than the physical factors. You know, all those three cities have pretty good infrastructure, but where the differences seem to be are on particular kind of social and individual characteristics. And then that Davis and Boulder seem to be fundamentally different kinds of biking towns, where in Boulder it's more about biking as recreation and exercise, whereas in Davis it's biking as a part of daily life. And where Eugene fits in, it's a little murkier, but maybe it's more of a combination of both of those, somewhere in the middle.
Getting back to the Boulder question, with the cost of bikes and that issue, is it more of a topography issue maybe being influenced? Do they have more hills, so you need more gears, higher quality bicycles?
It's a good question. When we asked about hilliness, Boulder did come out statistically significantly more hilly, but only about 8% of people said it was really hilly. So it is hillier, but I'm not sure. And again, we need to do our multivariate analysis, but I think that's not going to fully explain those differences that we saw.
From my experience in Boulder and just seeing the people biking, I think it's, they've got all the gear and they've got all the, fancy new bike and the,
Yeah.
all that stuff. I think that's where, the amount of money's coming in versus just a utility bike.
Right. Right. So it goes along, I think, with the different kind of bikes that you see in those communities go along with sort of a different culture of biking. Whereas in Davis, it's you can have a clunker and you get around as a mode of transportation. And in Boulder, it's much more serious bikers who may be biking around town, but are also getting out of town and doing the recreational biking as well. So, like I said, this is very preliminary, and we have to explore this a little more. But that seems to be the story that's emerging.
How do the towns compare in total size in area?
Let's see. Population, Boulder is slightly bigger than Davis. So in 2000, Davis was about 60,000 people. Boulder was about 75,000 people. And I don't have the numbers on area, but Boulder's going to be a little bigger to go with that bigger population, but not I think, hugely more dispersed than Davis is. Because they've got a strong growth boundary, just the way Davis does. Question over here?
Yeah. How much does the range of the ratio of student population to permanent population range between the different?
Another good question that we need to explore. So Davis is 25 to 30,000 students with 60,000 population. The Boulder campus, I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing is comparable size for a slightly larger city population. So I don't think that's going to be drastically different between those two communities. Now, Eugene is about twice as big, so that's that also throws things off a little bit.
Can I remind people, because some people came in late, to use the microphones in front of you when you do ask a question, or behind you if there's one behind you. Thanks.
Okay, now we don't have much time left. I do have the bikes to soccer study I could go through, or we can do more questions if you'd rather. So maybe I'll take two more quick questions and then just flip really fast through the bike survey study.
It was more a comment. The thing that seemed most interesting was that in Davis, more people felt like they were safer, that they would not be hit by a car than in the other communities, and that seems huge. Although it's interesting that they also reported more crashes than the other communities. So they felt safer, but they were involved in more crashes.
Yeah. But it may not be car crashes. Yeah.
I'm curious if in looking at the culture, you looked at opposition culture at all. In Portland, we tend to have a vocal minority that objects either to the dollars spent on cycling facilities or to sort of allocation of the pavement, including the trucking community. Did you look at that, compare cities?
Well, that was part of the look at the history was kind of understanding that opposition along the way. But in this survey, we didn't set out to do that. But I think we could look at some of the kind of the negatives of the positive stuff that I'm reporting here. So that that's a good point. But I don't think there's a lot of resistance in any three of these cities to doing bike stuff. It's just sort of how much should we be doing. Okay, so let me just quickly show you this last one, because this is kind of interesting, focusing on kids. This is the Davis AYSO, American Youth Soccer Organization, which I imagine you have in this region as well, National Youth Soccer League. So there are about 2,000 kids in Davis who play in this. And the league was having trouble sort of scheduling all the games on the field. And it used to be very centralized at the one big park in the middle of town, and they outgrew that. So as a part of their scheduling, they decided they were going to try and schedule teams on fields in their neighborhood so that people would be closer to the fields. And as a part of this, they also wanted to encourage people to bike to soccer games. So they made up these bike stickers rather than bumper stickers that said, play AYSO soccer, bike to Davis. And so they really tried to promote biking to soccer games. So with a team of volunteer undergraduates, well, they were doing it for credit, we did a little 2-page survey of parents at games. So we went out there and at the games, with the clipboards, got them to fill out these surveys over a series of weekends, and ended up with a 49% response rate. We have a survey for 49% of the kids playing in the league, which is we were really thrilled with. And you can see it's distributed across the different divisions. That's under 6 years old, under 8, and so on. Now, the big question we asked was, how did you get to today's game? Did you drive, did you bike, or did you walk? In Davis, Saturday morning, soccer games, good weather, field close to home. Anybody want to throw out a number? What? 90%. Okay, I was thinking 50%. This is what we got. Over 75% of players were driven to the games. Now, this is probably better than in most communities, but you'd think in Davis it would be a whole lot better than this. So, again, why? What's going on?
Do you get trip distance at all?
We're working on that. We've got one thing that kind of gets at that, but we need to geocode this and do some more analysis. But just, quickly flipping through some of the factors, differences by age, and under 10 was the highest. You might have expected U12 or U14 to be highest. Boys biked more than girls. If you were on your home field, you were a whole lot more likely to bike than if you weren't on your home field, meaning the field in your neighborhood. But still on the home field, it's only a quarter of people biking. But this seemed to be kind of the strongest indicator. Kids who bike to school also tend to bike to their games. Kids whose parents are bicyclists, so this is the frequency of parents biking, and then the frequency of kids biking to the games. Parents bike more, kids bike more. We also looked at practices. Do you bike to practices? Higher than for games, but still less than half of the kids are biking to practices.
Is this data before or after the push to try to...
This is this year. And then I think the next one is the change. Now, we didn't do the before survey in 2005, but in 2006 we asked, out of 10 games, how many did you bike to? How many do you think you're going to bike to this year? Last year, how many games do you think you biked to out of 10? So that shows actually, and again, it's not perfect measures, but what parents are reporting is that they're biking to games more in 2006 than they were in 2005. So that's good news. That suggests that if you make it convenient and you encourage people, you can get people biking a little bit more. We also asked about biking to school. So this is percent of kids who bike to school and don't bike to school. And this is a whole lot more than what's going on at the national level, which is somewhere under 10% of kids biking to school these days. This seems a little high. I'm not sure that's actually true, and there's some other data we can compare this to that I haven't yet. And then this is the parents' question only. So this is parents, how frequently they bike. And we do get over 10% of parents saying that they bike daily, which is great. But then there's 50% who bike never or less than once per month. So, kind of the story here is this is probably a lot more biking that's going on than what's going on in other communities. But is it as much biking as it should be? I don't think so. I was surprised the numbers were as low as they were. But there is some good news in that a program like this seems like it can have an effect. So you make things easy, you encourage people, and maybe we can increase that biking rate. So my overall conclusions, and then there are 3 minutes for questions. Davis works as a place where people can bike as a regular part of their daily lives. I think that's true. Not that everybody does it, but it's possible. It got this way because of this confluence of dedicated citizen activists, city council members, and public works staff, all trying to make it happen at that one point in time. But complacency in the face of growth and change within Davis explains why things have dropped off. We were the bicycle capital of the U.S. I'm not sure we deserve that label so much anymore. And then the question is what we're going to do about it. And maybe it's kind of bringing back some of what we used to have, and then we will deserve our label as a bicycle community. So I'll just leave you with two images. Oh, so I apologize for covering so much so fast, but hopefully that was interesting, and we've got time for a few more questions.
Yeah, well, given your statement regarding the trends of cycling over time at Davis, is there any political or city discussion that maybe they'll lose their platinum status if their percent commuting drops down to say 12% or 10%, which is in line with other competitive cities?
I haven't heard anybody express fear that we will lose our platinum status, and I don't know if the League of American Bicyclists would actually do that to us. But I think there's a growing sense that we're resting on our laurels, and do we really deserve this at this point in time? And even if we do deserve the platinum status, is that enough? Maybe there's something beyond that. Do we stop there, or can we increase things? There's this city in Denmark, Odense, Denmark. Anybody been there? They had this amazing level of biking and decided it wasn't enough. And they put in this huge effort, promotional effort, a few little infrastructure changes, and they went from something like 40% of trips by bikes to 50% of trips by bike. So just because you have a high level of biking doesn't mean you stop there. And we've sort of had that attitude in Davis, and I think that's starting to change.
Has being designated as a platinum bike-friendly city, how do people in Davis think about that in terms of the advocates, public works folks, and the electeds? Has it changed attitudes in any way?
I think it was kind of ho-hum, we've been known as a bicycle city for a long time, and when the designation happened, everybody was excited, but I don't think it really changed how we felt about anything. I think it gives a little leverage now to the bicycle advocates, the people who want to make more things happen, because they can say, look, we were designated platinum. We've got to live up to that. You can't let this slack off. We're also at a transition point, I should note, in that our longtime bicycle coordinator for the city retired, and so they're hiring somebody new, and I think that creates some new opportunity to make things happen.
Don't even think about it, Roger.
Yeah. A follow-up, or was there another?
Question.
Uh-huh.
Any thoughts about density playing a role here? Or does the city does it want higher density to try to get more people? Because I'm thinking with suburban growth, that may be playing a role in the percent decline. Distances are increasing.
Yeah. Whoa! If I can go way back, Davis is not terribly dense, but it's also not sprawling. We have a very strong, there's probably an easier way to do this. All right, if I quit, now I'm almost there. Okay. We have a very strong growth management policy. So we are not growing outward. So there is infill going on. Davis is becoming denser, but there is not a lot of growth at the moment. And it's not likely to grow outward very quickly. So it's not. It's kind of in the middle. It's sort of suburban densities, but densifying slowly. And one thing the city did was real thoughtful planning, not just with the infrastructure, but with respect to land uses. So each of these neighborhoods, the city sort of divided into 5 areas: east, north, south, west, central. Has a commercial center with a supermarket, and that was sort of a conscious policy on the part of the city to do that. Downtown is the center of commercial activity in the city still, but you've got these neighborhood centers. So it was land use planning and transportation planning together that really makes it work. The campus, which is right here, is going to develop this tract of land as a residential community for students, faculty, and staff in the next few years. But it's very bicycling oriented. So anybody who lives here can't have a parking permit on campus, and there's going to be transit and bike paths linking this to that. There's also that funny little notch up there that's undeveloped. A year and a half ago, the voters voted not to approve the development that was proposed for that site. So there's a very kind of anti-growth sense in the community. But the proposal up there would have been very bike and transit friendly. You know, it was not a bad design. It's just people didn't want the growth and the traffic. Oh.
You mentioned the car parking structures. Is that primarily because the cost of housing? Spending $70 million, that's a lot of money for car parking. When I've been on the Davis campus, the bike parking racks seem stuck more in the 70s, the toaster, the wheel bender racks, and that may be depressing the usage. Has there been any discussion about, building a bike station or anything more bike friendly?
Yes. It's a complicated issue because housing prices are so high in Davis. A lot of staff can no longer afford to live there. So they're commuting from other communities into Davis. So the sense on the campus is, we've got to be fair to staff and make sure that we're providing parking for them at a reasonable price because they can't afford to live here. It's not their fault that they're not biking. So there's a lot of pressure to still provide parking for people on campus. The campus has now acknowledged that it hasn't been investing in bike parking to the degree it should have, and they've got a bunch of grants, and they're now revamping the parking all around campus. And because building parking structures is so expensive, they've actually been going through this study to sort of look at what are the options, and maybe economically it makes more sense to put the money into promoting more biking than into building more of this structured parking. So I think the campus is moving back in that direction to more support for biking. But it's complicated, and there are a lot of equity issues that get wrapped up in the discussion.
I've noticed looking at that bike map, which is on the city website, I think, that the subdivisions built, I guess, after the 50s, sort of the outlying ones, I mean, the bike paths and bike lanes are amazingly integrated into those. You have connecting cul-de-sacs and et cetera. I was wondering if that was just a developers responding to the community, or if it's actually a design regulation to have such well-integrated bike paths.
Now it's the latter, and originally it was some of the former. So Central Davis, just north of campus, mostly after the 50s, you don't see those bike paths. They're bike lanes, but they're none of these bike paths. Then North Davis up there and West Davis have these and some of the new stuff have these integrated paths, off-street paths that are part of the Greenbelt system. A lot of that comes from Village Homes, which was built in the 70s and is over here in West Davis. It's a little hard to see, but it's kind of this funny-looking thing right here, which is very famous for having been a very green development at that time. Well, it's all built on cul-de-sacs with these bike paths that link everything together, and there's a common green in the middle. So the stuff that followed that sort of adopted that model and then got put into code so that anything new that happens, they tie it all together through the path system. So, you don't see sort of this subdivision, that subdivision, that subdivision. They're integrated from a street network standpoint as well as a bicycle, and even more so from a bicycle path standpoint. So I think it was some kind of developer push, but also then city policy that makes sure that happens.
Doesn't work. And you're highlighting the importance of university and early stages, and also the importance of bike culture and having this kind of bike-friendly change. I'm curious, with the trends that you've shown of reduction in mode share, was there a distinction at all between students and non-students? And then also, what does the university feel? What is the university's role now? Since the 1990s, has it changed over time? And there's these programs, like reaching out to the soccer, but are there other programs the university's involved in to really try and promote bicycling?
Yeah, well, the former question, very little data about biking, and even the census data, it's a little fuzzy because it includes there could be students as a part of that bike to work data as well as workers in the community. So we don't have a lot of good data about the details of the trend towards less biking, but what we do see is that it's happening for both populations. Students are biking less and residents are biking less is what we think is going on. I would say the city and the campus have been complacent for the past decade or two. They promoted all this biking and then, we're a bicycle community, good. We don't need to do anything more. So I think they've both of them have slacked off. And we'll see. As I was just saying, the campus is thinking more about how promoting biking makes good financial sense for them as opposed to building more parking. So they may be a little bit ahead of the city at this point in terms of reinvigorating the bicycle infrastructure.
Can you talk a little bit about the how satisfied you are with the quantity and quality of the data you collected?
Not completely satisfied. And so actually I should have mentioned this. Our plan is to, this year, again with a little bit of money that we have, to do a very short phone survey so that we can get a much more representative sample and a good measure of how much biking is going on in these communities. And then we can also use that data to weight the more detailed data we have from the long survey. So we intend to do some more work to get better measures of how much biking is going on. But it's a money issue. If we could get more funding, we could do a better job.
Have you contacted Bikes Belong? As a potential source of funding?
Not yet, but maybe Jennifer and I can talk about that. Yeah.
Regarding the childhood physical activity issue, I know Portland has struggled with keeping schools in our local neighborhoods. It seems Davis has done a better job. Is there any parallel study looking at childhood obesity or type 2, type 2 diabetes, and the physical mobility? I mean, Davis compared to another community?
Well, not Davis specifically, but there's lots of work going on out there on this issue, coming from the public health community.
Right, but Davis might be a good
one.
Case,
and, and as far as I know, nobody's doing that yet. So that's maybe another sort of funding hook, is to look at what's going on in Davis.
What's your assessment of the current political leadership and the kind of the forecast for political leadership that's going to help Davis out?
That's a good question. I've been kind of removed from Davis politics just because I'm so busy with other stuff. And I think, I think the current council we have is very supportive of biking, but there are just a lot of other issues to deal with at this point in time that maybe we didn't have so much before, like affordable housing is the biggest one. So, these other issues absorb a lot of the energy and the attention, meaning that although people are supportive of biking, it's not such a high priority problem to deal with. I think a lot's going to depend on what happens with this new bicycle pedestrian coordinator the city's going to hire, and that could make a big difference. And there's also some sense that it has to do with kind of the attitude within public works at this point too, and what their priorities are. So I don't want to say too more since this is getting recorded, but that's kind of my general take on it.
But a follow-up question, if I might, and what is the emphasis or what impact will the governor's new emphasis on sustainability, global warming, addressing that and that whole issue, how do you think Davis is going to be responding to that, and will bicycles be a part of it?
Well, I hope so. I mean, Davis, Davis has said we intend to be a model for this whole climate change issue and how local governments can contribute. And that covers a lot of things, besides just biking. But I'm hopeful that biking becomes a big part of that. I haven't heard them say that yet. But it's a natural. I mean, we do have more biking than almost anywhere else. So, we need to show what communities can do. So I think that's one of these forces coming together at this point in time, that if we can take advantage of that opportunity, we could make a real difference. So I think it's not a guarantee that means we're going to do a whole lot more on the biking front, but I think it's an opportunity that hopefully we've got enough sort of support for that we can take advantage of it.
We have some web questions
okay.
that have been covered, but all back to the sort of the Boulder versus Davis thing. Have you looked at if there are differences in per capita income between those two communities, and if that might have anything to do with the difference in sort of recreational versus utilitarian cycling?
Yeah, I don't have the data right in front of me, but that was one of the things we were trying to sort of control for, and I forget how it ends up coming out. I mean, both places have pretty high housing prices, but I'm just off the top of my head, I'm guessing Boulder might be a little higher on the income front than Davis. But we'll be factoring that into our multivariate statistical analysis to control for that. Yeah.
Just to get a sense of the size of Davis, how far is it in miles from one end of the map to the other?
It's about 10 square miles, so this is about, I think it's about five miles from here to here. This is South Davis, and this is sort of outside of Davis city limits, actually. So it's, it's not huge. 5 miles, bike ride, flat, no hills.
Map there, is that a state route or interstate, and does that kind of cut off South Davis and lower its cycling?
You know what? I didn't show that picture. I showed it yesterday, but this is Interstate 80, so major route, cutting South Davis off from Central and East Davis. There not only are there the streets which have bike lanes on them, but there is a bicycle bridge here. That's that orange line that you can see. And a few years ago, well, about 5 years ago, about when I arrived in Davis, they built a tunnel right about in here, which goes under the railroad tracks, which is what this line is, and then under the interstate. And I should have brought a picture of that because it's a really lovely facility, actually, with nice landscaping. And that's done a lot to link South Davis to Central Davis. This is a state highway, which is a depressed freeway. And again, not only are there streets with bike lanes, but there are a couple of bike bridges over that as well. But that's less of a barrier than I-80. Back there?
Actually, I'm not really familiar with Davis, but most of the people there have really good access to public transit, so that they would rather take it more than taking the bicycle. Because here in Kirtland, sometimes you need to take the bicycle to go to the station or something, especially when you're in like suburbs or on the mountain or something.
Well, as I mentioned, there's this system that was designed for the students, and the students are using that rather than, in situations where they could be biking. And that's open to the community as well, that system, but it tends to focus on campus rather than downtown. So it's mostly students using that bus system. And then there's a county system that links Davis to other communities. And those buses have bike racks so that people can bike to the bus and then take the bike with them. There's also a train that runs Sacramento to San Jose that runs through Davis. And people use that both to commute to Sacramento and to commute to the Bay Area. It's an Amtrak line, the Capitol Corridor, and you can take your bike on that. So it's amazing. You go to the train station in downtown Davis, at 7 in the morning, and there's tons of people getting on the train. So there's this good link to the regional transit system as well.
Yeah, but that's the bus. Like the Max or something has many bike racks, so that there would be many bicycles there. I mean, is it equivalent?
Well, like I said, the regional system you can put bikes on. The local system doesn't do that because you're sort of at bicycle distances anyway. So people aren't likely to put a bike on the campus shuttle. But there are a lot of people who leave bikes on campus so that when they get to campus by transit or even driving, then they've got a bike on campus that they can use to get around campus because campus is pretty spread out. And it's amazing. You go to campus on a Sunday and there are just bikes everywhere. And you think, these aren't all students in the library studying in the middle of a Sunday. So there are a lot of bikes that get left on campus. And that actually becomes a problem because a lot of them then get abandoned. And, maybe once a year they go through and clean out all the abandoned bikes, which they then auction off. But it's almost to the point where there are too many bikes on campus. And it's become a detriment.
We have a web question on this safety thing, but before that, maybe I'll remark, having been an undergraduate student at Davis, and the issue of being hit by a car and the higher rates. You get hit by other cyclists through those roundabouts. I mean, particularly if you're a freshman. Not used to. I mean, those roundabouts are pretty crazy before your class starts in 10 minutes. But the question was sort of differences between perception of safety versus reality. And do you know if you're going to be able to get like bike crash data from the 3 cities to see if there are any real differences in safety?
Yeah, we haven't done that yet, but that's a very good suggestion, and we will have to do that. But the problem is that in general, the data aren't that great because not everything gets reported or sort of put in the right category. But that's a very good point. We'll see what we can find from those places.
So UC Davis is about a third of the population of Davis as a city, and I know Tim Bustos and David Takamoto work together a lot on things. Do you see, and with the political climate or what you guys are doing there, kind of in between, do you see UC Davis really taking hold of the reins and moving the bike thing forward, using the students and the power that they have there on campus to affect the rest of the city?
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but as I suggested earlier, I see the campus moving towards being more supportive of biking, whereas the city's been kind of going along doing the same thing for a long time. So I think that's quite possible, that just as in the 1950s, the campus was really the instigator of what went on in the city, I think that could happen again. And it's partly because just the financial issues that the campus is trying to figure out how to deal with the transportation problem with limited resources, and biking just makes sense as the thing to do. As well as this West Village project, which is really aiming towards making biking possible for people.
Is that the high density?
That's this project right there, West Village.
I wonder if you looked at the seasonal changes of biking, if weather and other things played a role.
Wish we had the data. Yeah. Actually, I have a PhD student, who's developing a survey that the campus will use on an annual basis. All the UC campuses are going to have to measure the use of cars to get to campus related to transportation planning. So we'll be doing that on an annual basis, and at least this first time around, we're going to try and do it at 2 seasons so we can kind of gauge the difference in bike use. I mean, anecdotally, when I talk to my students, it's clear that in the winter they're biking less than in the fall and the spring. Fall and spring are wonderful, but winter is a little dreary with this fog that we get and the rain. So I wish we had better data on that. Okay, somebody else back there.
On the subject of strengthening the bike mentality within the community, is there a particular strategy that you think has been very successful or the most successful, and are there strategies that you're hoping to implement in the future that you think would be more so?
Well, I think there are probably some of you here who are more experts on that than I am. There hasn't been the city has a bicycle commission that advises the planning commission and the city council, but there hasn't been a bicycle advocacy group there in some period of time. And in part because of Ted's work and this presentation that he gave, there has been this resurgence in interest. So a new group is formed called Davis Bicycles that's trying to bring back some energy around the bicycle issue. And I think the issues about climate change and gas prices going up, and public health concerns, it's all sort of converging on the sense that we need to do something more here. But I don't know how to make it happen. Yeah, that's not my expertise.
I know you said there's not a lot of new development going on in Davis, but do you happen to know in the development regulations or your bicycle planning person whether they favor off-street paths or more integrated streets with cars and bicycles sharing the cartway, or both?
We're doing a good balance of both. A new development that goes in, they're trying to connect the system of bikeways through the green belts that we've got to make that a more continuous system. So any new development that goes in, they're forced to consider how their project fits into that system. But in the meantime, we've got this amazing system of bike lanes on streets as well. Now, we're not building a lot of new big streets, so that really hasn't come up so much. Although there are a few kind of critical links where attention to bicycles is missing, like one key street right through downtown, where there is no accommodation for bicycles along there, even though that's the major east-west route.
I was just wondering if there's been any conversation about the impact of growth limits, either through regulation or referendum, on bicycling, because it seems to me like, if there's such a limit on growth and high housing prices and people are being forced to commute from other communities, that might be having an effect.
I would think so, and you would think there would be some discussion of that. I mean, it was very interesting to see what Davis did when there was the proposal for the development of that, that notch piece of land up there. It was voted down about 2-1, and my take on it is that the majority of the no vote had to do with concerns about traffic, that it was going to increase traffic within the community, and maybe some property value decline because of all that new housing coming online. And then there was a contingent who felt like the proposal should have been even better than it was, that it didn't do enough to include affordable housing and alternative transportation and all of that. But I voted for it for the kind of reasons you're talking about, because if you put that development in Davis rather than in Woodland 10 miles up the road, it is going to be more bikeable. The people living there are going to bike more than if you put them in Woodland. So from a regional standpoint and a global standpoint, that's where the growth should be going. And there was a lot of accommodation of bicyclists within that, and would have linked the greenbelt system from that on the left to the right, and I think really added to the sort of the bicycle infrastructure in Davis. But we voted it down.
So a lot of your data about trips is around the commute trip, and you talked about some of the reasons why that may be going down, because people in Davis working outside and people from outside working in, and the trip distance is too long. Is there an appreciable drop in bicycling, in the presence of bicycles on the street? Or are people still using the bicycle quite a bit in town, maybe for non-work trips? And in Portland, and probably true everywhere, we're saying that the commute trips are only about 20 to 30% of all trips.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have data to show the trends in the other trips. So we collected data about biking for those other purposes, but we don't have anything we can compare it to see, if it's going down. You see bikes out there. When you're biking, you're not the only bicyclist. Almost any time I pull up to an intersection, there's somebody else there with me. Whether that's, I think that's a good mix of biking to campus as well as biking to other places. But like I said, we just don't have the data on the trends.
But
I think,
does it feel different?
Everybody in the community says biking's going down, and I've only been there for 5 years, so it's hard for me to judge. I don't know that I've observed that change in that period of time. But I think that the sense among the longtime residents is that, yes, there is just a lot less getting on your bike to get places, that used to be the norm. If you had to go to the store, you just got on your bike and you went there. And now that's not the norm. The norm is get in your car, and it's the exceptional family or the exceptional trip within a family to get on your bike to go there. You'd think that biking to soccer games would be where people are biking, and I showed you, it's still 75% driving. The Saturday morning farmers market, you see all kinds of families biking there. But again, what share of those trips that represents, I don't know.
You may have covered this, I may have missed it. Is there, with the campus discussion about bicycling, a lot of students may be using transit because they come from transit areas that they use transit previous to campus life. Is there discussion about reintroducing maybe a how-to bike class for incoming freshmen, or as many campuses do provide computers as part of a student fee, maybe provide a bike as part of a student fee?
Yeah, there has been talk about that. Both the need for the education, because as Jennifer said, we still have that problem when the freshmen get to campus. They don't all know really how to bike, and there are a lot of accidents. And also that idea that let's give every freshman a bike, or at least give them some guidance on buying a bike. Because part of the problem is that students go out and buy a really cheap bike, and then they just don't like it very much. Whereas if they invested a little more, it would really work for them. So that may come out of these discussions the campus is having. They're just wrapping up this study where they're looking at all these different alternatives. And Ted, my student, among others, a lot of students have been pushing for programs like that. So we'll see. Back there. This is going. Jennifer, are we okay? Okay.
My roommate got admitted to graduate school at UC Boulder. Came with this really great two-sided sheet all about bicycling on campus and all the resources and all the ways to encourage. I don't know if Davis does that or
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, what we're doing is probably pretty minimal because we just expect students to come and bike. And if we thought about it, we probably could be doing a whole lot more. So hopefully that's going to happen.
You just got to get admitted to grad school at Boulder, just like you want.
And on that note, before we thank our speaker, I will put in our plug for next week's talk. We're going to have Professor McMullen from Oregon State talking about the pros and cons of the vehicle mile tax that's being talked about in Oregon. Thank you very much, Susan, for joining us.
Well, thank you all. Great questions.
And in today's Wall Street Journal, there's a great article on bicycling U.S. versus Europe.
Oh, wow. I'll leave that up there for now.